So much, Jane. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to be able to see all your faces, as far flung as we all are. And I, in turn, am very grateful to be joined by two of my executive producer colleagues on Group, the web series that Jane mentioned. Dr. Elliot Zeisel, who some of you have already met, is sort of the linchpin of the entire series. He's a performer on the show, playing the role of Dr. Ezra Hertzfeld, but Elliot is himself a psychoanalyst who's been active in New York City for over 40 years, a distinguished fellow of the American Group Psychotherapy Association, a founding member of the Center for Group Studies, former vice chair of the Group Foundation for Advancing Mental Health, and a living link to the founders of group therapy, as he can explain to you. And we're also joined by our colleague Ronald Gutman, who is an actor, a producer, a bon vivant. You have seen him. It's one of those faces that when he reveals his face, you will say, oh my God, he's that guy. I've seen him in so many things. He's been in movies like The Hunt for Red October, On the Basis of Sex, Avalon, The Believer, Green Card. He's been on TV shows like Hunters, Mildred Pierce, Bull, Mozart in the Jungle, Mad Men, Sex and the City, Lost. He works all the time. He's been in recent shows that he's been quarantining for because they've been shooting during the pandemic, which he can tell us about perhaps.
Thank you, Jack. That's you know what I mean. I'm really very thankful that you give this list of credits. I'm very touched that you mentioned all that. It's very sweet of you. But knowing you, working with you for the last year has been one of the highlights of my professional career.
That's so sweet
to see how you work and how you take on projects and how you lead us in so many different ways and how you make things happen, how you handle logistics of producing and is quite wonderful to watch and to be part of.
Kind. It's
a
joy for me. So I wanted to invite Ronald and Elliot to join because honestly, I had a little moment of panic when I saw this evening was being advertised as an evening with Jack Lechner, because even though I teach at Columbia and I'm used to the sound of my voice going on and on and on, I thought I would just be so more comfortable if we could turn this into a conversation and actually. Which would not only involve Elliot and Ronald, but also the rest of you, to talk about the show. I don't know if anyone has already watched Group. I know Louise has. And if for the purpose of, for anyone who hasn't seen Group, I'll share screen and I'll just show you the trailer from season 1, which will sort of set the baseline. And then we can talk about what happened from there on. So hang on, let me just share the season 1 trailer, and I'm going to optimize for sound and video. You never quite know on Zoom, but it's really short, so we should be okay. Hang on a sec. Okay, if everyone can see it, here's the Group trailer, season 1.
We have a new member.
My name is Henry.
So, Henry, you're a group virgin, huh?
There's nothing under the sun that you can't talk about here.
I'm jealous. I'm overzealous.
I haven't talked to my dad in like 15 years. He left when I was 10. I don't talk about my dad.
I get angry. Baby, believe me.
You have a really hard time accepting love.
I guess I just want you to see me.
But you don't judge me.
I went to a bar, and a man came up to me, and he mistook me for a call girl. And I played along.
I got issues, but you got them too.
I feel crazy saying this.
Outside of here it would be crazy, maybe.
Yeah.
But inside here, where it's safe, we're just talking.
Yeah.
What's crazy about that?
Here we go.
What is he doing here?
In this process, you're going to find yourself participating in exchanges that you don't have in polite company.
I think I should leave.
What exactly happened between the two of you? This feels really violating.
It's not like a dinner party.
I put all my cards on the table.
How many more things do we need to hear?
You're really being an asshole.
I don't trust you remotely.
You're here to engage people. If someone doesn't like something, it's their job to tell you.
Welcome to group.
So that's the show. At least that's season one, and kind of a very tight condensation of season one. As you can see, the show entirely takes place in a room in the therapy group, moderated by Elliot, who can talk to you about how he actually became a performer in this remarkable ensemble. All the rest of the performers are professional actors who are improvising their dialogue, but actually along rather tightly scripted parameters, which is a process that we've seen in comedy shows like Curb Your Enthusiasm, in movies like Best in Show or Waiting for Guffman. We just haven't seen it very often in drama. And the missing person here is Alexi Lloyd, who is the director, creator, showrunner, genius behind this show. Alexi I knew Alexi years ago in London when I was an American expat and he was a French expat there. And we'd really kind of fallen out of touch. But in the meantime, Alexi had become a filmmaker. He made an independent film called 30 Beats. And he then read the novel the group is based on, which is called The Schopenhauer Cure. It's by Irvin Yalom, who's one of the giants of group therapy and also a very fine novelist. And the novel is about a year in the life of a therapy group. So Alexi thought he would do a feature film adaptation of the novel. And he thought, well, I'd better do some research. He knew a lot of therapists. His father was a psychiatrist. His uncles were psychiatrists. He sort of grew up steeped in it. And as a result, had spent his whole professional life running away from it. But so then he went to a group therapy convention and met Elliot. And Elliot, you can kind of talk about what happened from there.
Jack has heard this story a few times, so I'll try to keep it fresh for you, Jack.
Thank you.
So Alexi showed up at something we call the American Group Psychotherapy Association annual conference, the AGPA, American Group Psychotherapy Association. It is a summer camp for group therapists in the dead of winter. And it's not a conference where people gather to play golf and then go to a meeting. These people come and they come to work. And it's a week-long experience. It's an immersion in group treatment that includes people from all over the world. And they come to not just lecture, but to demonstrate and participate together in order to teach the different ways that people approach the work of group therapy. So this particular year, this is several years ago, I attended a lecture by a friend of ours from Canada, Molin Lesh, who happens to be the co-author with Irv Yalom. Irv Yalom wrote The Schopenhauer Cure that this project is based on, informed by. In any case, Molin gave a talk, and at the end of the talk, a group of us were gathered around him asking questions. And I noticed this fellow to my right with a press pass and a French accent. And that was Alexi Lloyd, and he was asking questions. So Ray knows this. I grew up in a modern Orthodox family. And in my family, the door to the tent was always open. My family there's an expression in Hebrew, hachnasat orchim. How does that translate, Ray? How would you translate that?
Welcoming guests.
Oh, you welcome guests, you welcome the stranger. So seeing this stranger with a French accent and a press pass at this meeting, I was inclined to move in his direction. And I asked him, what's your interest in the subject? And he said, well, I'm a filmmaker. I'm based in New York, and I optioned the rights to The Schopenhauer Cure. this book that Yalom wrote that explains in novel form how group treatment works and how it works particularly with a difficult personality. So I said to Alexi, well, that's fascinating, that's interesting. But you know, if you're gonna make a film about group, you really ought to think about being in a group. To which he said, oh, that's a great idea. And he asked me for my information. I gave him my card, and I never expected to hear from him. But 2 weeks later, he did come to see me. And we spent an hour together. And as Jack explained, I learned that Alexi's father was a psychoanalyst in Paris. His uncle and his great uncle were analysts in London. One of them had actually met Freud. And Alexi wanted to make this film. So we agreed to work together, provided that Alexi comes to group as a member, but not as a researcher. And that was, let's say, that was a Tuesday. To do the kind of work I do as an analyst, you have to remain in treatment yourself. You have to keep your instrument fresh. The conscious and the unconscious things you absorb in working with people, whether it's individual treatment or group treatment, it's profound. And in order to keep the instrument fresh, you have to keep talking yourself. So I've been very lucky to have the same analyst for almost 50 years. This year, it'll be 50 years. And I was in a session with my analyst a couple of days after meeting Alexi, and I was on the couch. She has an office in the West Village. And I'm talking about the meeting. I'm explaining who I saw and what I did. And I said, oh, and I met this French filmmaker. And she said, oh, you met Alexi? I said, what? You know him? And she said, oh yeah, he's my upstairs neighbor. So remarkably, this can only happen in the Jewish world or a small New York world.
And forgive me for interrupting, but it gets even crazier, which is that same woman, Elliot's therapist for 50 years, is the mother of my wife's best friend's husband.
Say that again slowly. The mother of my
wife's best friend's husband.
Remarkable. Yeah. So
she's someone that I've known for 35 years.
So Dr. Welber is her name, Dolores Welber, explains that Alexi came down to see her a couple of weeks before the conference and told her about the project. And she said to him, why don't you go to the conference to find out about group? And the result was that we met. So for the first time in 47 years at that point, I put my hand behind my head and she took my hand. And I said, Dr. Welber, she happens to be Syrian. She's an Arab. I said, Dr. Welber, you don't know this, but the term bashert, the Yiddish term bashert means kismet. This was fated to happen. And indeed, many months later, when we filmed the first season, we filmed it 2 floors above her office in Alexi's living room.
Which you can see behind me here.
So on the last day of the filming, the 3 days of filming, she was probably 88, 89 at that point. I walked her up the flights of stairs and introduced her to the cast as the mother of this project. And that's how he became involved in this project.
And how did Alexi persuade you to actually go on camera and perform in this show?
Well, that was a difficult process because I had no intention of participating as an actor. I wanted to facilitate a process for him that would help him figure out how to do this. So sure enough, group is a wonderful treatment modality because when you have a problem, you have a challenge, and you subject it to the unconscious experience of 12 other people, it's inevitable that somebody comes up with an idea. So along the way, people convinced Alexi that making a film was just not going to cut it. It was the beginning of the streaming experience. So very quickly, it migrated from being a film to a series that might appear on a streaming service. And from there, it became apparent to Alexi that to capture the pathos and the humor in group is a very rich place where if you like the theater, you like group. So to capture the ebb and flow of group process, if you scripted it, if you wrote it out by hand, it would not capture what can happen between people. in the space of an hour and a half a week. So he decided, and this was a great contribution on his part, to have the cast improvise the dialogue. He would create some narrative beats, and then within that framework, he'd say to two actors, without telling anybody else, you two are going to have a conflict in the first 10 minutes about X, Y, or Z. And then the rest of it is just by the seat of our pants. So it took some convincing on the group's part, on Alexi's part, to include me in the process, because to give it structure, you can train an actor to be a lawyer or a doctor for 10 minutes at a time when they're filming, and they stop the filming and then they do another take of it. But we decided to film this for an hour and a half at a time, the length of a group. And to do that effectively, the thought was that we needed someone like myself who knows how to facilitate a process and to give it structure, so that within the structure, all of this improvisational work could unfold.
And so, of course, the irony is, on one hand, you're acting, you're performing with performers, but on the other hand, you're just doing what you do every day.
Right. So the actors kept asking me, what are your qualifications as an actor? And I'd say, frankly, I never went to acting school. I know only through experience of treating patients who are actors, I know something about acting. The rest of it is, I've been reading my lines for 45 years. So I know something about what I'm doing, but that's beyond that, it's all improvised.
And meanwhile, we've got this ensemble of truly extraordinary actors who have vast histories of performing in all kinds of different venues, as well as Alexi was equally clever in finding two, I think you have to call them plants, who are very skilled actors, except they are also longtime group therapy members. So they actually already were up to speed on how group works and could sort of bring everyone up to that level.
The thinking was that if you know about playing tennis and you play tennis with somebody who's better than you are, your game comes up. So in the process that Jack is referring to, because these two actors were acquainted with how group process can unfold, it got the level of engagement up to a very engaging pitch that otherwise would have been difficult to accomplish. We prepared the actors in my office for 3 months before we filmed a single frame. They would come in character and we would role play what it's like to be a patient. I would give lectures on the beginnings of group therapy and the purpose of group therapy. I distributed scholarly papers that they would read and then come back and have questions about. So it was a boot camp for becoming a group patient that allowed these actors to more fully inhabit the characters they were playing and become the skilled patients they became.
And I'm just dazzled literally every time I watch the show. And also, frankly, watching the bits that didn't even make the show, just seeing how deep they were able to get into character and into the process. And I wasn't part of the casting, but Elliot, I know you were very involved in it. And Alexi has always said there are some brilliant actors who just can't do this, who can't improvise in this way. And then some people just have a gift for it.
You're probably more acquainted with that than most people, Jack. You know actors very, very well, and know that certain situations require a different kind of application of the actor's skills and abilities.
Some actors, some of the best actors in the world, really need lines. They need, and then they'll apply everything they have.
Who comes to mind, for example? Who's an actor that needs lines?
Robert De Niro, who can improvise, but he really prefers to have lines.
Okay, well, we're not going to invite him to join our cast. He's not a candidate.
It's a shame. He'll be very disappointed. And Ronald, do you have a moment?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm chewing on my food. Yeah, it's true. First of all, I want to address what Elliot said about listening, because as we all know, when we read interviews by actors, they always say the most important part of acting is reacting. And so Elliot, being used to reacting and responding and listening to the others, is a perfect example of a non-actor who can easily act because he's used to listening and reacting. That's why he's so efficient in the show. That's one thing I wanted to say. Otherwise, in terms of improvisation, most actors love to do so in rehearsals, sometimes during a scene, to help stretch out the feelings and everything that goes on, to add your own words, something that the scriptwriter put down. But to improvise for an hour and a half or 90 minutes without any script to start from is a different achievement. That's a different thing altogether. That means you are in character, you have a certain storyline. Alexi gave every actor a certain storyline, like, you have to somehow hit on this girl, you have to somehow feel and think about your father, you have to be aware of this, be aware of that. Everyone had a few anchors to hold on to, but then you're on your own. It's a whole other different exercise than to take a script or a play and say, okay, I need to improvise to open up my soul and my mind to what's going on right now. Two very different exercises. So the cast, indeed, and it's true, Elliot was very much part of the casting process, is quite a different feast. And I think our cast has been brilliant at it.
I'm remembering, Ronald, that in my beginning process as an actor, you were present for the filming of the first season. And you and your wife, Amy, gave me my first acting note.
Amy's here with me, by the way. So please, how do you remember? What do you remember she said?
So, the process started, and, group can start out very slowly without much action. And certainly in our beginning process, we were feeling our way into it. And as we were doing that, we took a break at some point. You came over to me in a very kind way, and you suggested that it would be helpful if I spoke more and if I explained more about what actually is happening in the process, without being too heavy-handed about the explanations, but to invite the group into a discussion, because that's part of the challenge in this process. And indeed, it worked very well, so that very quickly in the first season, the first couple of episodes, the viewer gets an understanding of what we're here to accomplish, just as the group was learning that as it unfolded.
And I gather
it's nice of you to mention. That's why her name is at the end of the credits. Absolutely, as a thank you.
Yep. And I gather, Elliot, that occasionally the members of your non-televised groups complain that you weren't quite as vocal in real life group.
Right. I mean, I get, on a given day, I could be accused of any number of things that remind somebody of an unresponsive parent and a withholding sibling. I get a lot of that.
But that's part of the process, of course.
But that's part of the process.
Bring on to you whatever they're working on.
Right. In the beginning of the filming process, that was the challenge. How do we begin this group process and make it look and sound authentic? That was the challenge. And in fact, if this was my office and I was working with a collection of patients that I assembled for the purpose of having a group, I would be relatively quiet at the very beginning. I might start the group by saying, would you like to meet each other? Do you all know each other? Would you like to know something about each other? And then, people would begin the process by announcing who they are. They usually start with things they know the answers to. We call those object-oriented questions. To start a conversation with a new person and to ask them something that we call an ego-oriented question, which is a more open-ended question. An object-oriented question is, how old are you? Where were you born? You know the answers to those questions. An ego-oriented question is something that's more risky, like, well, what is your position on global warming? That's a more risk-taking question. So in the group process, in the beginning, it's quiet, it's slow. People come to agreements about how we're going to work together. What are the parameters for how we operate together? So there are group agreements that I tell every patient about when we first meet. Before anybody comes to group, They have a screening interview. And in that interview, I'll tell them, after finding out about their lives, about their life, I'll tell them something about group and about the agreements. So the agreements include no socializing. The patients I work with in group only see each other in group and don't see each other outside of group. It's a congregation for an hour and a half a week where everybody gets to see how relationships get formed and maintained. So we don't want the action to take place outside the shul. We want it in the shul. We have an agreement that says you arrive on time, you take up a portion of the talking time, at least one portion of the talking time, you pay your bill at the end of the month, and you keep things confidential. There are 5 elements in the contract. So as often as I tell people about those agreements in the individual treatment session, when they get to group, it's as if I've said nothing. They start all over from scratch. So they have to come to these agreements through a dialogue together. And it's a very effective dialogue because it means that in the moment we're learning that everybody who's attending is actually agreeing to abide by those rules. And those rules, those agreements, are the rules that create the culture in the group where this work can unfold. So in the group process in the filming, we hit the ground running. We handled it as if we were an existing group where these agreements had already come into life. And because it was a group of neophytes, it was difficult in some way to make it sound convincing at first, which is why Ronald's note to me, Amy's note to me, was so helpful, because I could then say things out loud to this group about the challenge that we're all facing, and then they could either say something about it or not. And the group process, as it turned out, it unfolded pretty well.
That's the other thing about scripting, is that even though the dialogue is improvised, it is a scripted show. And the reason for that is that we're making sure that something actually happens in every episode. I worked, as Jane said earlier, on a reality show for Sundance Channel called Girls Who Like Boys with a very experienced production company that had done a lot of reality television. And on our first meeting, on our first day, they said, here is the law of reality television. If you want anything to happen in the lives of these characters, you have to make it happen. Because if you do not make it happen, nothing will happen. Just keep that in mind anytime you watch a reality television show. And if anything is happening on screen, it's because somebody made it happen.
And that's because it's scripted, Jack, or because
it's not even scripted to the degree that group is scripted. Although some shows like, I don't know, Duck Dynasty are that scripted. But for most reality television, what it is that they know they have combustible element A and combustible element B, and they shove them together in a situation where those elements will absolutely react. And so that's the work of reality television, is just constantly finding those elements that will combust with each other and finding a situation in which they're guaranteed to combust. Alexi always talks about how, because he grew up with therapists, he always was very aware that the portrayal of therapy, not just group therapy, but frankly any therapy in film and television, is usually very inaccurate and very reductive. And it's funny because when I met Elliot the first time, I think the first thing I did was apologize to him because I was very involved in, as Jane said, in the movie Good Will Hunting, which I guess is one of the, it's in the canon of movies about people in therapy. And even while we were working on Good Will Hunting, the entire creative team of Good Will Hunting, all of us had been in therapy. We all knew that therapy does not remotely work like this. Nobody gets better just because their therapist hugs them and says it's not your fault. And we had lots of arguments about, should we actually make this into a more representative version of therapy? And what we kept coming to is the problem is that then the time span of the movie is going to be Matt Damon's character is in therapy for 25 years, and we couldn't do that. So we ended up with this kind of Hollywood version of therapy, which I had been guilty about for 20 years, ever since working on Good Will Hunting. And I was delighted when Elliot was not, in fact, as I just had imagined all this time, that real therapists must just walk around thinking that Good Will Hunting, it just, completely misrepresented us. But Elliot, you can tell me what you said at the time, because
I think I said to you that I thought it was one of the better representations of what can happen in treatment between two people, because it did portray some complicated process between the two characters, the therapist and the patient. It did portray the complexity of what it means to engage with another person and really listen and really understand them. So I thought there were moments where you distinguished yourselves really from a lot of the other junk that's been out there. I agree with you, Peter. The Bob Newhart, that Bob Newhart version of it. Mm-hmm. What was that called? That was called
Bob Newhart Show.
Yeah, it was silly, and I can say that again, as Jack explained, the goal was to make something that would better portray what can actually happen in treatment. And to our credit, the 7 chapters in season 1 and now the 6 chapters in season 2 are being used in training programs all over the world. I have people writing to me from India, from Australia, from all over the States. People are using the 7 chapters for 3 reasons. They're introducing their new patients to the idea of group by having them watch the series. They're resolving resistance in certain patients. They'll say to a patient, you remind me of that patient in chapter 4 in season 1. I want you to watch it. Come back and tell me what you thought about it. So they're using it that way. And then they're also using it to teach group leadership, small group process, and to understand the interventions that are made along the way. I mean, my way of doing it is just one way. And there are things that I do that could be done much more effectively or better, given a different frame of mind, a different feeling set. So people are actually using this to teach in social work graduate schools, in psychology graduate programs. Sadly, in psychiatry these days, they're not teaching interviewing skills very well, if at all. So psychiatrists are largely involved in biological solutions to human problems. And yet, even with that, we do have psychiatrists who come to study with us who are still invested in the talking aspects of human engagement. And I'm very proud that it's being used that way. There's an undeclared war between those who advocate for talk treatments and those who advocate for biological solutions to problems. And, indeed, there are some human problems that respond well to chemical interventions. But there is no pill or medication that they'll ever create that will teach people the art of human engagement that you can learn in group process. You can't teach someone how to get along with another person by swallowing a pill. It'll never exist. So it takes the hard work of engagement and week-to-week commitment, showing up to the minion, if you will, to make this kind of thing happen. So the actors will tell you that it's sometimes hard to distinguish where they begin and end and where the character begins and ends. Because in the middle of a free-form exchange, when you're improvising and someone turns to you and says something stimulating, says something that's slightly aggressive, or says something that's sexually arousing, and your heart starts beating more quickly, is that the character's heart beating quickly, or is that the actor's heart? It's hard to know. So I can tell you that as a consequence of participating in the project, a number of the actors have gotten into therapy. As I learned in the process, the first audience in this process is the crew. So the crew who is filming this and who is doing the audio portion of it and who organized the whole effort, there were a number of them who came up to us at the end of it. One of them, my wife was there for the last for the rap party. I learned so many new so many new terminologies. For the rap party, my wife was there, and there was a fellow who was working. We had 2 cameramen. there was a still camera, a fixed camera, and there was a camera that was handheld. So the handheld camera guy was very well known to Alexi, and a friend of Alexi's, and he
His
was
name is
actually
Luke
in the circle
Geisbuehler.
with
He
us.
actually shot
Luke
both Borat.
Geisbuehler. Yeah, he does the Sacha Baron Cohen movies. And he was terrific. And then the fellow on the camera was a fellow of color, a black fellow, who came up to my wife at the end of during the wrap party and said, you know, I heard things in this circle. And one of the cast members is a black fellow. And he said, I heard people say things that I think all the time, but I don't have the freedom to say. And you know, I went back and I talked to my girlfriend last night about something I heard here yesterday. And it was really helpful. So I have the idea that if you're open to being influenced, this series, this web series, can actually help people understand themselves and encourage them to get more of this kind of information if they're interested.
That's the hope.